Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. On Perpetual Chess, I have weekly conversations with the chess world's best players, promoters, and educators about their lives, careers, current projects, and best practices. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. Good day, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. My guest this week is the reviewer for Chess Life magazine, the most popular chess magazine in the United States, and I'm sure one of the most popular in the world. He also writes generally about chess as a bit of a tech expert and has many, many book reviews that we're going to discuss. So my guest today is John Hartmann. John, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ben. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Sure. So, John, I've been wanting to get you on for a while because as regular listeners will know, I love chess and I love chess books, but I'm not as well read as a lot of our guests. And I've been wanting to do a sort of deep dive on chess books. And obviously we'll talk about your career generally and your life in chess. But the main thing, your greatest strength, I would say, is just that you've read everything. On your website, you've got over 100 reviews of chess books. And I feel like there's a lot we can cover in terms of helping people sort through what the best way to improve using chess books is. So what have you been reviewing lately, John? Let's start just with the general.
So this month, right now it's February 9th. So my review of some endgame books just came out. And I looked at 5 books, Romain Edouard's Chess Calculation Training, Volume 2, Endgames. I can't pronounce his name. Efstratios Grivas's book on bishop endings from Thinkers Publishing. Cyrus Lakdawala's First Steps, Fundamental Endings. Esben Lund's Sharp Endgames. That's from Quality Chess. And I think he's from the Ukraine, the Ukrainian Grandmaster Adrian Mikhalchishin and Oleg Stetko's Mastering Complex Endgames. So that just came out. I've got a review of Jan Timmons' Timmons Titans, which is one of the best books, chess or non-chess, I've read in a long time. That'll be out in the March issue.
Oh, great. Yeah, and that just won Book of the Year for 2017 from some chess organization, I believe.
I think it was the English Chess Federation, and a richly deserved book. As I say in the review, I mean, I actually I like to put some actual chess in the reviews so that people who maybe aren't interested specifically in the things that I'm writing about at least have a diagram to look at or some sort of analysis to go through if they desire. With this, there's absolutely no chess, just because the stories in this book are astoundingly rich. I spent a lot of time talking about the first chapter where he talks about Alekhine and Alekhine's time in Portugal towards the end of his life. And for me, it's one of the most beautifully written things I've read in a long time. Again, chess or non-chess. Timon is just an outstanding writer. And then I focused on his chapters on Max Euwe. I should say what the book's about. Basically, Timmons Titans is a study of 10 world champions, 9 of whom he knew personally. I think 6 of whom he played over the board, going from Alekhine all the way through the modern day, all the way through Kasparov. And the treatment of some of the different champions varies depending on how well he knew the person. So, for me, the chapter on Petrosian was a little bit short, although the things he said about Petrosian's wife and her behind-the-scenes machinations was very interesting.
What did he say?
Basically that she was kind of the power behind the throne. She was a very powerful woman in her own right, but was very conniving in ways that would benefit her husband. He also talks about how strong Petrosian was in blitz and how that was evidence, really, of his great tactical acumen. One of the things I really liked about the book was that he sort of deflates a lot of the myths we have about some of the world champions. So, for example, if you read any sort of popular characterization of Tal, he's a crazy attacker. He played all these unsound, unsafe sacrifices, and he bamboozled his opponents to win the game. Well, Timmons says this is not entirely true. If you look at his games, he also had a very refined positional sense, and he was a very good endgame player. He says similar things about Petrosian. The Petrosian is, commonly characterized as this sort of very careful, plodding, almost, reactionary chess player, like a more Karpovian than Karpov. But he says if you look at the games, he could also, he was very talented in other parts of the game. So it's really, Timmons Titans it's an outstanding book. I think anyone who's listening to this, really of any strength, if you like good writing and you like good chess analysis, because Timon is an outstanding analyst, that's a book you should definitely get.
I will definitely check it out, because I've realized recently, this is something that GM Pascal Charbonneau mentioned when he was on too, and it's also sort of been brought to light for me as I've hosted this podcast, that my favorite types of books to read are the memoir / game collection books, because I have a finite number of hours. I have limited ambitions for my chess. I'd like to get better, but I'm probably not going to be world champion. So for me, to learn more about chess and have hopes of improving my chess game at the same time is about the best I can hope for. So for that reason, with the accolades that have been coming in generally for Timmons Titans, I've wanted to read it, but even more so based on what you said. I mean, that's such high praise that it's just one of the best written books, period, because even the really good chess books generally, you can poke holes at the writing in it, even if you love the stories and you love the chess content.
Right. I mean, very few grandmasters are as literate, I think, and that's not a slight on any writer, but very few chess writers are as literate as Timon is, and it's a wonderful book. I would say though, just linking it to improvement, I think that's actually a really important idea. As someone who's interested in improvement myself, there are a lot of ideas out there about how to improve. The tactics only approach, or if you look at Reddit, all these people are talking about which tactical trainer to use and how many problems to solve. And when I read that, I'm often reminded of what Rudolf Spielmann said when he was talking about Alyekin, and he would say, he said, I can see the tactics as well as Alyekin can, but I just can't get the same positions.
Huh.
I think there's some truth to that. If all you are is a tactician, and you try to approach every chess game as if it were tactics only, it's like the guy who has a hammer and that's his only tool and he thinks everything's a nail. You can't solve every position in a chess game with tactics alone. So one of the best ways to hone your intuition is by playing over lots and lots of well-annotated games. And for me, the older games, so games with like Alyekin or Capablanca or Botvinnik or Smyslov, I think those games are outstanding for that purpose, because you get some chess history. I really liked what Greg Shahade said on the pod a couple weeks ago, where he was talking about one of the signs that a kid will be a good chess player is how dedicated and how obsessive they are about chess culture. And I think that's really true. I mean, if you get a kid who wants to read chess books, I think that really bodes well for their future in the game. And because the chess culture is not only what keeps them hooked in, but it's where they learn positional chess. It's where they learn different, endgame ideas. It's for my money, it's one of the best ways to get better.
Yes, I agree. So let's rattle off some more books, John. And again,
sure.
So I had prepped you that one thing I was going to ask you was, and this is probably the hardest chess book question of all, but desert island books. If you were stranded on a desert island and you could only bring a handful of chess books, which ones come to mind?
So I've always found this to be an interesting question, because the premise of it is that I'm stuck there with, let's say, 5 books. So in that case, I'm going quantity over quality, right? So,
right.
And not to say this is a bad book, but like Polgar's 5,000 combinations book, that Brick, you know the book I'm talking about?
I know it well, yes.
Yeah, that would be the first book on my list. But it's not one of my favorite books. It's a great tactical book, but it's not dear to me. So the 5 I was thinking about, and I've actually got a list of 6 here. I still don't even know which one I would kick off. The first book is Tartakower and Dumont's 500 Master Games of Chess.
I remember that one well, yeah.
It's I like it for a number of reasons. I like it because the games in there, they really go up to 1930 or 1940, so you're not going to get, some of the more esoteric openings that became common later. So there's a lot of E4, E5, a lot of French, a lot of some Queen's Gambit, but there's a good enough variety of openings that I feel like you can get a good sense of how chess is played by different people. The games themselves are brilliant, and I think there's value in the fact that the annotations may not be 100% correct. Taylor Kingston, who is a chess writer, he's been posting these analytic updates to various books in a Facebook group, the Chess Book Collectors group, which for any listener who is interested in chess collecting, that's a great group to be in on Facebook. I think the New York chess teacher Brian Caron is the admin.
Yes, and supporter of the podcast. And it's got a shocking number of members, like 14,000 people or something posting about chess books.
It's weird because randomly you'll see people like Nigel Short pop up and you're like, wow, Nigel Short liked my comment. I feel like a genius all of a sudden.
Right. Well, Luke Van Wheelie did say he has more than 1,000 chess books. So
he has a little bit more. I was trying to figure out exactly how many books I had, and I think I'm somewhere around 800.
Okay. So you got some work to do.
I got to catch up. Luckily, the publishers, and I'm very thankful for that, they do keep sending me books, so that helps in that regard. That's actually why I started reviewing in the first place, is because we were poor and I wanted chess books, and I thought, well, maybe I can get some free chess books because,
So how did you start?
Well, it's funny.
We'll get back to the Desert Island books, by the way.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. So part of my inspiration was my friend John Watson, who you had on the pod.
Thanks in no small part to you, by the way.
Well, you guys had a barn burner of a discussion. There was a lot of stuff in there I'd never heard before, including the story about going drinking with Tal. I thought that was the greatest thing ever.
That was great.
So yeah, I met him in 2009. I had just moved to Nebraska. We were living in Illinois before that, and I went to a tournament down in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I'm going to play, and I'm meeting people, and all of a sudden in the other room I hear the voice, and it's the voice from the chessclub.com shows. I think at that time he was doing the interview show. So I was like, well, and I know that voice. I've read the books. I should introduce myself. And I started talking to him, and I had just written an article for an academic book called Gary Kasparov is a Cyborg, or What Chess Can Teach Us About Technology. And basically it was a study of the relationship between the human and the computer in modern chess. And my contention was that functionally, we're all cyborgs. If you think about the difference between you with your cell phone and GPS and you without your cell phone, there's a very real difference in the way that your lived experience works, right? You feel, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, the way we're all addicted to our cell phones, but we feel less secure. Suddenly the world doesn't have the same phenomenological feel that it did before. And I think the same thing is true for chess. Chess is fundamentally different today than it was, let's say, in 1989 when I started playing chess. The engines have really changed things. So I'd written this, and I'd talked about Watson in the article, and lo and behold, there he is in the other room. And I said, hi, my name is John. It's a great honor to meet you. I just wrote about you, and I told him what the article was about, and he starts rattling off all these things about Martin Heidegger, who was one of the touchstones in the article. And I said, well, this is impressive. Here's a chess player who knows Heidegger, and that's very rare in my experience. So we got to be friends, and I'd been reading his book reviews, and I started thinking that there might be some value in reviews for players like me. John wrote a lot of reviews, and they're, still to this, I think he's the best chess reviewer out there. But he doesn't get to do it as much as he used to. And I thought, well, maybe, if someone could write reviews for the class player, that might be of value. So that's what I started doing. I started saying, writing reviews that were aimed at class players and written from the perspective of a class player. I really like, for example, Matthew Sadler's reviews in New in Chess.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't want to, and what I'm about to say certainly should not be taken as any slight on Sadler, because he's a fantastic reviewer. But in these reviews, he writes about how he's reading these books blindfold on the train going to work. And that's just so foreign to my experience and abilities that sometimes I wonder, how valid some of the points he makes are going to be for someone like me. You know, I'm a 1,500 talent who, through hard work, has gotten to 1,800. And most of that has been through books and software. You know, chess learning is a struggle for me. And so I thought reviews from that perspective might be interesting. 2013, I started doing it. At the 2013 Chess Journalists of America meeting, I, through various odd occurrences, was awarded the best chess blog for the reviews. And I met Dan Lucas, who is the editor of Chess Life. And we started talking. I ended up doing a few freelance reviews for them beginning in January, I think, 2014. The first one was of Jacob Agar's Grandmaster Preparation Positional Chess, which is a brilliant book. Everything he writes is brilliant. And then I think later in 2014, I think was it December 2014, I got the job full-time, so to speak. So it's been 4 years, 3.5 years of writing a column every month.
Yeah, and it's not just, as you mentioned with your most recent Endgame reviews, it's not just one book per month. I mean, you... No,
that's one of the things that I struggle with is how to, you know, how to approach different books and do it in a diversified way. You know, I don't want to do too many opening books. There's a lot of opening books. I love opening books probably more than the next person. But there's more to chess than openings. In fact, I should say I'm actually working on a review right now about opening repertoires for improving players. So we're looking at Vincent Moray's My First Chess opening repertoires for black and for white, Sam Collins' Simple Chess opening repertoire for white, and I'm also looking at a new book on the Tarrasch defense by Russian Grandmaster Bezgodov, if I pronounce that anywhere near properly. So I do look at opening books, but I also want to look at memoirs and teaching books and middle game books and end game books. And in some of them, I just focus on one thing, like the review I did of Alex Fishbein's book on the Scotch Gambit, which is a wonderful book. For me, it's sort of a paradigm for how an opening book should be written. Very clearly, clear analysis, lots of explanation. But in some of them, I do 5 books, like I did last month, or I should say in the February issue with these endgame books. It's real. I'm just trying to do trying to serve as many different needs as I can with a review column, and it's a balancing act.
Yeah, and for those listeners who are international, with the blessing of the aforementioned Dan Lewis and the USCF, you post these reviews on your website as well. So
yeah, the website chessbookreviews, all one word, .wordpress.com. So you can read everything I've written there all the way back to 2013 and some of the embarrassing things that I wrote at the very beginning.
Huh. Okay, so John, let's get back to the Desert Island book. So we've got 500 Master Games of Chess, which was a formative book for me way back when I used to have to slog through descriptive notation, which I now try to avoid.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, so many of the books that I want to recommend are only in descriptive. And so one of the things I do with my students actually is I try to cajole them into learning a little bit of descriptive, just so that they can speak the other language. So Tartakower and Dumont, I think, is a fantastic book. The second book for me would be Pal Benko's Chess Endgame Lessons. This is a really hard to find book, but for me it was one of the 2 books that I sort of felt like once I had them, I was a real collector. The other one being the original of Sheckman's The Games of Tigran Petrosian, not the shoddy reprint that is available in paperback today. So Benko's Endgame Lessons is a collection of his columns in Chess Life, and they're outstanding. I mean, the depth of his knowledge is stunning. He's an excellent writer, and a lot of the examples he uses are for real games from the late 70s and early 80s. So it's very practical, and it's absolutely one of my favorite books. Whenever I'm feeling unstimulated or sort of depressed about my chess, it's one of the books I pull off the shelf and sit down and leaf through with a board, and it perks me right back up.
Excellent.
The third book would be Max Euwe's Judgment and Planning in Chess. Simply for personal reasons, it was one of the first real serious chess books I read, and I can still remember him talking about a queenside majority and how important it was. It's one of the reasons I play the Queen's Gambit exchange variation, just to get that... to get the minority attack going. That was one of the things I remember learning specifically from Euwe. Again, another book that's mainly in descriptive. I think there might be an algebraic version somewhere, but I don't have it. Let's see. So that's 3. I think the 4th would be Botvinnik's 100 Selected Games, just because he's such a great annotator. There are a lot of really good annotators, but very few can really approach his style and the logic that I think you find in his notes. I'm trying to think of others. Smyslov would be one. Bent Larson is another great annotator. Alyekin is pretty good too. So I guess, yeah, just for the notes, it's such a wonderful book, and of course another one in descriptive. And then finally, I know a lot of this has been a sort of an ongoing topic of debate on the pod. I really like Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual.
Okay, yeah, it is a contentious issue,
and it's not so much because I feel like when I play through the analysis, I know I'm learning something, right? Especially if I just focus on those 220 some odd blue diagrams. That's the basic knowledge he feels that one has to have to be a master level chess player or a master level endgame player. But for me, it's just the analysis. It's so deep, and it's so rich. You can get lost in it. And so, particularly on a desert island where presumably I'm going to be pretty bored and I'm going to be looking at a lot of chess, I feel like that book would last me a very long time.
Okay, there you have it. And as expected, I've read 1 out of the 5. I was off to a blazing start, but then I slowed down. I still haven't even had a chance to read Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual, despite all the recommendations from guests.
I should be clear. I have not nearly gotten through the entire thing. I've spent a lot of time in the Rook Endgame section just because they're Rook Endgames and I need to improve in them. But, I've been dipping in and out of other sections as I need to. He's very good, apparently, also on opposite color bishops. So that's one thing that I think he's known for. I think that Jan Gustafsson was talking about that in his video series with Dvoretsky, which is, if you're interested in Dvoretsky, for me, that's the single best introduction to Dvoretsky's thought. It's the video series he did with Chess24 right before he died.
Yeah, it was like a Q&A, right?
Yeah, so a couple of them were, he did do a Q&A, and then he did a series on endgames with Dvoretsky, and then there was one, I think, on calculation with Dvoretsky. And so he walked you through different examples. But in the endgame series, there's a video that I think is just titled Philosophy, which, given my academic background, stood out to me immediately. But it's a very nice summary of what Dvoretsky takes to be important in chess training and in thinking about chess. So for anyone who really wants to get a sense of it, to sort of get the first taste of Dvoretsky, it's a very palatable way to do it.
Okay, good. Yeah, I've seen it up on the banner on Chess24, and I'm a Chess24 member, but I haven't watched it. So more for me to check out. So, John, you're a working dad like me, and it sounds, I know it can be tough to find time to read. So how much time do you manage to find? Like, how much time are you spending reading chess books in a given month?
Quite a bit. I mean, part of it, I do teach, and I run a club for students at a local school. So part of the reading is for teaching purposes. Part of it is for my own training purposes. Although, as you say, as a father of a 3-year-old, I don't have nearly as much time as I would like. But I do have a couple days a week where my daughter goes to school, and then I'm teaching and thinking and writing and reading. So I don't know, a couple nights a week, and at least one of those days for 4 or 5 hours, I'm reading and studying and trying to figure out what I'm going to review next.
Good for you. And I guess you probably get more books sent to you than you can review.
I do. So actually, that's one of the nice things about doing it is that I do have a lot of books that I can't review and that I may not have bookshelf space for. So my students get them, or friends of mine who are also chess players here in Nebraska. Sometimes I'll bring books to a tournament and just say, have at it. I've even given some away as prizes for like upset prizes or things like that at tournaments I run. So they get into good hands if I can't make use of them.
Nice. Okay, so John, I want to talk about the steps method. So to give a little bit of background, I used to teach chess a long time ago, and then I got back into it a few years ago. And when I got back into it, I started to network on the Facebook chess teacher group thread a little bit, and a couple esteemed chess teachers like yourself and Alex King and a few others really spoke highly of this step series that I had never heard of. So on your guys, I found it a bit overwhelming at first because there's a bunch of volumes and they're kind of constructed in a not entirely like there's volumes and side volumes basically that make it a little bit hard to figure out how to follow. But you guys were such strong advocates that I've checked it out and incorporated it into my teaching. But I still sort of feel like I'm just scratching the surface of what these books are capable of providing. So could you tell our listeners a little bit, for those who don't know about it, how you discovered these steps books and what they offer?
Absolutely. So when I started playing chess, I think like most American players, especially when I started, this is 1989, my education was fairly haphazard. I think my first book was Fred Reinfeld's Chess in a Nutshell, which is, a tiny little book, and it gives you the basics, but not much more. And then I think I went on to a Bruce Pandolfini book and maybe Chernev's Capablanca's Best Chess Endings. So it's a hodgepodge of books and ideas. It wasn't very systematic. And so one of the things that I think a lot of American players struggle with is when they're trying to improve, there's not really one sort of system or method that you can go to that has a good track record and that you're getting a fairly complete chess education. When I started teaching, I started volunteering at a local high school, and I think I asked on the chesspub.com forum, I started asking for advice, and someone mentioned the Stappen method or chess steps, and it's a series of workbooks from the Netherlands. I think the authors are Rob Brunia, who I think he's passed away, and Cor van Wijgerden, who I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that too, who is a Dutch chess trainer, and he's actually one of the people who was lucky enough to be a recipient of the Oiva ring. So after Oiva died, he was given a ring by some notable chess fan in the Netherlands as a sort of prestige symbol, as a gift, an honorific. And after he passed away, it was passed on to various important chess players in the Netherlands. I think the first wearer was Hans Bohm. The next one might have been Jan Timman. And this guy, Van Wijgerden, he was one of the people who wore this. So he's a fairly important person in Dutch chess. Basically, the system, it's a series of 6 steps, and at each step you have different workbooks. Originally it was just one, so it would be a step 1 workbook. Later they added a plus, which is sort of like an augmentation of the same material that's in step 1, and then maybe a little more complicated things. They added an extra, which was sort of repetitive material for the basic step 1 workbook. And then I think in the past few years they've added what they call mix, which is sort of a capstone for the whole step. So after you've done step 1 plus, step 1 extra, you've got this mix workbook, which is just problems. You don't know what the stipulation is, but it's all related to things you've learned in that step. So it's a system of 6 steps. It comes with a teaching manual for the teachers. The lesson plans are very well laid out. They give you an explanation of the entire teaching philosophy. And what they're trying to do is give you age-appropriate and level-appropriate knowledge. So for step 1, you're learning things like what a twofold attack is, where you've got 2 pieces attacking one of your opponent's pieces. And if they do nothing, you can probably win material. Or you will learn about a profitable exchange and why that's important. So taking a higher value piece of your opponent's with one of your lower value pieces. These are very basic tactical things, like learning not to hang your pieces and learning how to defend yourself if your piece is under attack. But on a very basic level, it's something that I don't think I ever really learned systematically. So when I started going through it myself, and part of this, research is always me search, right? I wanted to get better at chess. I wanted to fix some of the holes in my own game. I started going through these, and there were things in step 1 and step 2 that I was like, wow, I wish I'd known this when I was 13. I would have been maybe a decent chess player if I'd known this. So step 1 is very basic. Step 2 involves things like a double attack, how to set it up, how to search for it on the board, how to recognize it. Things like pins, more defensive stuff, checkmates and twos. Step 3 is sort of a continuation of Step 2. You're looking at tactics that are roughly 3-ply deep. So I do something, you react, I either checkmate you or I win material. And there's things like eliminating the defender, discovered attacks, double checks, things like that. And again, with each part of the step, the instructor has examples to show the pupil or the class how the tactic works. You give them a search strategy for trying to be able to decipher it on the board so that when they're presented with a position, they can actually read it. And by identifying the targets and identifying certain structures on the board, you can sort of figure out what tactic you need to do. And then you have lots of problems for the pupil to solve to reinforce it. One of the really important things with this, and I think something that people often misunderstand, is that it's not enough just to do the workbooks. So some people see this and say, oh, it's a workbook series. My kid will do the workbooks. I just assign them the problems. They'll get better at chess. Part of this is also having a trainer who can go through the games with you and explain some of the things that may not be in the book, like basic positional ideas, or help you find the tactics that you miss and help you understand how you may have been able to identify the roots of the tactical situation on the board, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And just to highlight one particular feature, I haven't read all of the prose books, the how-to manuals, but I have made use of the workbooks. And for me, what you were saying about the take a more valuable piece and the more attackers than defenders, and to take something for free, since I work mostly with kids, that's the most invaluable resource of all in there for me, because it's so basic, but there's so little of it available for kids. And I spend so much time trying to get my students to keep their pieces safe that it's good to have something to drill on. And I think even for stronger players, it's, if you have, I think a lot of especially adult players just have issues with oversights. So the more you drill it, the fewer you'll have, luckily.
Absolutely. And that's really, there aren't many books that do that. I think Susan Polgar just put out a 5-volume series of books that has some of the same elements. She did this with Russell Enterprises, with Hannon Russell's publishing house. And it has some of the same things. I saw Kostya Kavutsky. He just recommended this in a blog post for his Bay Area chess teaching stuff. So that is one other series that might be useful in the same regard. But for me, exactly what you said. These books meet your chess students where they are. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just thought of another one. The one where they're threatening mate against you, and there's one way to stop it.
Right.
That's something that obviously that's a huge equity swing in a game. If someone's about to checkmate you and there's only one way to stop it, you better find it. But if you're just solving tactics puzzles and you're just the attacker, that's not something you're ever going to get at. That's not a pattern that you're going to learn the ability to repeat unless you do exercises like that, or just the school of hard knocks, of course, like most of us learn it. But it's good to be able to drill these concepts that other presenters of material haven't necessarily thought of.
And that's something that continues all the way through. So for myself, I'm still in the middle of Step 5. So Step 2 and 3 are basically 3-ply tactics. Like I said, I do something, you react, I either checkmate you or I win your queen or something like that. With Step 4 and 5, it gets a little more complicated because now you go to 5-ply. So you set up the tactic in some way, right? So I lure your queen to a square where I can then do a double attack. Or I block an escape route for your king so that then I can effect checkmate. But even there, as they get more and more complicated, and they continue with tactics, but they add in some strategic ideas. One of the things I really like about the steps is that they talk about strategy in terms of activity and vulnerability of pieces, so that you want to maximize the activity of your pieces, you want to minimize their vulnerability, and vice versa for your opponent. But it lets you talk about things on a very basic level with Step 2 students. So your pieces need to be active if you're going to win material, or if they're going to if you're going to have any chance of checkmating your opponent. When you get to step 5, you can talk about things like pawn weaknesses. And you can talk about how pawns are vulnerable in certain situations, or if their pieces are tied down. If your opponent's pieces are tied down defending a weak pawn, that's a vulnerability. It's a really nice way of talking about basic strategy, again, in a way that you can meet your student where they are.
Yeah, and you use it a lot in your own teaching material, in addition to working on it yourself. Absolutely.
There's a lot of books that are really good for teaching. I steal liberally from Jeff Coakley's books, the winning chess puzzles, winning chess strategy, winning chess exercises. The steps books are in constant rotation for both, private teaching, individual teaching, and the work I do with groups. I've actually put a lot of it in ChessBase, so it's just ready for me to pull up whenever I need it. Another book that is really, really good, it's kind of hard to find, I don't even know if it's in print anymore, is John Littlewood's Chess Coaching.
I remember that book. Huh.
It's great. He talks about, he's got a list of maybe 40 basic endings that he thinks you need to know, and then he walks you through them. He talks about the value of problems and studies for chess teaching, which I think is really a really underrated resource for a lot of people. Endgame studies are incredibly beautiful, and if you choose the right ones, they can be very useful for teaching a tactic. The international master, Yochichan Afek, he just put a book out called Extreme Chess Tactics. And what he does is he uses some positions from real games to describe a double attack or a pin or eliminating the defender. And then he also chooses studies that have the same sort of theme. And it's, for anyone who is looking for material on a specific tactical theme to present or just, to improve their own tactics, that's a really great book too.
Okay, and for listeners whose head is spinning with all these recommendations, I'm getting these down, and I will link to it on the list of recommended books. So John's, of course, will have more recommendations than any other for you to track down all of these excellent resources. And just to wrap up about steps, it goes up to about the 2100 level, correct? If you're looking at it for yourself rather than as a teacher.
Yeah, so steps 1 through 5 are designed for a trainer and a group or a pupil. Step 6, which I think is for 2100, maybe even low master, is designed for a self-learner. And I've seen some things which hint that there may be a step 7, or there may be some sort of movement for a step 7, but I haven't seen anything real yet. So, not that I'm really worried about getting there myself anytime soon, but some of the listeners may want to push themselves a bit. Step 6 is very, very complicated. I think Erwin Lamy, I think he's also a Dutch Grandmaster, correct?
Yes.
I think he also was involved in creating Step 6.
Okay, so yeah, not for the faint of heart, most likely.
No, this is serious business.
Nice. Okay, and John, you're also, in addition to reviewing chess books, you've written a lot. You have a bit of a academic background in technology, and you've written about chess technology. Like, you've written for ChessBase, but you've also written about ChessBase and various other chess programs. Yep. So what recommendations or what observations do you have from probably exposing yourself to a lot more chess tech than a lot of our listeners have?
We live in wondrous times. I mean, that's really the only way that I can think about it, or the only way I can put it. When I started playing chess, so this was 1989. This was right before the World Chess Championship match in New York between Kasparov and Karpov. There was no internet. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was a very basic internet. So I remember tracking the games on Prodigy. Do you remember this internet, proto-internet service?
I do, yeah. Competed with America Online, right?
Exactly, yeah. Or CompuServe or any of those. And basically it was a glorified chat room or a message board. But, there were people talking about the moves and posting the moves. Then the next day, my grandfather, who was a very dear, sweet man, he would cut out the story, Robert Burns' account of it from the New York Times, and he'd mail it to me. So for years, when I was a beginning chess player, my grandfather did this. He would cut out the story from the Times and mail it to me. That seems very quaint today. when I can watch right now the Carlsen Nakamura 960 match is going on, so I can get onto YouTube and I can just watch that where they've got heart monitors, linked up to them. The amount of information we have at our fingertips today is staggering. And as chess players, I think we're silly if we don't try to make use of it. So a tool like ChessBase, which admittedly is expensive, requires, you don't have to have the fanciest computer in the world to run it, but you do have to have a computer. So there are some financial barriers to its use. But if you can get it, or if you can make use of some open source alternatives out there like ChessX, which is a great PGN database reader, or also the Tarash Chess GUI, which is a free program that you can use to play against engines. Both of these, they would duplicate maybe 85% of what you can do with ChessBase. So there are ways to get around the cost, is what I'm trying to say. For me, if you're not using ChessBase to organize your games, to study, I think you're really missing out. Because I remember the first advertising I saw for this back in, must have been the early 90s. I had, just to show you how old I am, I had ChessBase back for DOS. And it came with, I don't know if you had it, it came with a dongle. So you had to plug this hardware thing into the parallel port of your printer, into the back of the computer, so that the computer would know that your software was authentic. It was giant hassle, but I did it because, even with DOS, and you're using Fritz 1, Night Stalker, I think was the name of the engine back then, it was a way for the amateur player to organize information and sort of speed up the accessibility of that information. The advertising talked about it as a sort of multiplier, right? You can do 5 times more chess work in the same time. And I think that's true. So I can study my games, I can study my openings, I can look for specific endgames, I can research players I may be playing. Even, at my level, I've got 8 games in the database. Someone can look me up and try to figure out how to, well, my games in the database are very embarrassing, but they can figure out, what to play against me and things like that. And, you can play online and you can download the latest games. It's if you're not making use of the technology, I really feel like you're hampering yourself. So.
Okay, so I have to ask you a couple questions, John. So I have ChessBase right now. I've had different versions through the years. I'm not someone who is on top of the technology. I don't update with every update. And ChessBase provides a great service to the chess community. I enjoy their news coverage, and I love to be able to prepare for opponents if I'm playing actively. But I have to say, I don't find their software to be that intuitive.
It is not.
Okay.
There is a steep learning curve, and sometimes I have to remember that because I've been using for 20 years, what seems natural to me may not be natural to someone who is not used to sitting in front of the computer, or someone who is not used to the software. John Edwards wrote a book called ChessBase Complete, and I think it's it's the reference manual that doesn't come with the program. The documentation for ChessBase has never been particularly good. So this Edwards book gives you a lot of screenshots. He explains how to use the program to do different things. It's definitely something to pick up if you're having trouble with the software.
Yeah, I feel like I am. And is that still current? Like, when did this book come out?
It came out a few years ago, but the changes since ChessBase 12. I think he uses ChessBase 13 in that book, but the changes even since 12 are fairly incremental. So ChessBase 14 has a few extra bells and whistles. You can search your database for specific pawn structures or for similar positions. So if let's say you've got a rook endgame and you're trying to figure out how to play it, you can search in your database for positions that are very similar to it, and then you can sort of judge, what best play might look like. So that's a handy feature. They also have basically an auto annotate function now baked into ChessBase 14 that used to be only available in Fritz. But for 90 to 95% of what you would want, I think even going back to ChessBase 10, but really back to ChessBase 12, I don't think you need anything new.
Okay.
ChessBase 12 is perfect.
Yeah, and this strikes me, the recommendation of this book strikes me as the classic example of something where I would put off reading it for, a year, but probably if I just spent the 5 hours reading it, it would save me many, many hours of banging my head against the wall trying to do things on ChessBase that I feel like I should know how to do, but just can't quite figure out, which is a common experience for me.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of a hole in the market here, and part of that is that I think technical writing is just very difficult. I've been trying to show a friend of mine, for example, how to use MailChimp, and they lack certain computer savvy that makes it easy. So for me, it's I just do this, and this, and for them, it's a set of concrete steps that are somewhat confusing. And I can imagine it's the same thing for someone approaching ChessBase, which is a much more complicated situation. I mean, how do you know how to turn on the engine? How do you know how to configure the engine? How do you know how to maintain a database? These are all things that aren't really obvious. But, maybe someone will come along and put up some YouTube videos or
I was going to suggest that you do that.
Some of the articles I've written for US Chess Online are something that I'm trying to turn into a book about computers and training and how to best use the computer for training. Part of that, I think, really does have to be like a crash course in ChessBase or a crash course in Fritz, the ChessBase playing module. And I think that would probably be an important thing to do. So maybe this will push me a little further in that direction.
Excellent. So if anyone listening shares my frustration, give John a holler. Let's. I'm sure he has tons of free time to devote to this. Okay. So John, we were talking offline before we started recording a little bit about how you got into chess, and you told an interesting story of what got the genesis of your passion in chess. So do you mind sharing that?
It's a slightly embarrassing story, but we're all friends here.
Which is why it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. So this is 1988, 1989. I was 12 or 13 years old, and like a lot of first sons, my father and I sort of we had our struggles, and so as part of that, I ended up seeing a therapist. So shout out to Shaul Rabinowitz, wherever you are. If you're listening to the pod, if you're a big friend of the pod, this one's for you, Shaul.
I'm sure he is.
Of course. It's funny, though, because as I was thinking about this interview, I was thinking about how I started in chess and some of my early memories in chess. And he was the one, this therapist, he showed me how to play chess. And, why, I have no idea. I mean, maybe it was, as I looked at his website today, he's still in practice. He talks about psychoanalysis, and I was thinking, well, maybe he's, maybe he'd read Ruben Fine's book on chess and killing the father, and
right.
He's some sort of weird experiment on me. But I actually called him and left him a voicemail yesterday and said, thank you for all these years later. I mean, chess has been such a crucial thing in my life. Wherever I've gone or whatever I've been going through, moving to Illinois where I didn't know anybody to go to grad school. Moving different places, moving to Nebraska, finding a chess community here. It's been a constant in my life, and it's been really important. I remember picking up, and I think I wrote about this in my memorial for Mark Dvoretsky. I remember picking up Dvoretsky's Secrets of Chess Training at a bookstore in Levittown, New York. And looking at the pink cover and thinking about all the knowledge that must have been in there, and so I took the little bit of money I had and I bought it. And of course, I was utterly disappointed because the book was like 10,000 miles above my head at that point. Mm-hmm. These memories they're indicative to me of why I think I love chess literature so much, and why I think reviewing is something that I'm so passionate about. Is I want readers to have access to the kinds of books and the kind of knowledge and the kind of, beauty in these books that I had as a kid. I think that's really important, that in a world like ours today where, 1,000-point drop in the stock market, or what has our beloved president done today, you can open up a chessboard and sit down with a chess book and you can lose yourself in it. And I think there's value in that.
Yeah, I have sort of infamous story in my scholastic chess background from speaking of losing yourself in a chess book. I started playing when I was 12 and at 8th grade nationals. So I was probably 14 and I loved chess and I studied on my own. I was pretty self-motivated. But so we were at a hotel at a tournament and I can't remember what book it was. I want to say it was my 60 most memorable games, but that could be conflating memories. But in any event, I'm sitting there on a table with the chess book out, looking at a chess book, playing through the moves, and I was just studying for hours by myself. And it's one of these hotels where you have like adjoining rooms. So, and then about 2 hours later, my chess coach, very well-known and respected Philadelphia coach, Steve Shutt, who's won many national titles and inspired.
I've met him, actually. I've met him at the U.S. Open a couple times now.
Okay, so he inspired me and the Shotties and countless others. So he comes into the room and the toilet was overflowing. The toilet flooded the entire room. There was the carpet was soaking wet. And I was so engrossed in this chess book that I hadn't looked up for hours. And I was an honest kid. We like to horse around when we were on road trips, of course, like any junior high kids would. And Steve Shutt generally trusted me because I got along well with the other kids, but I would tell him if, something went wrong. And this was the one case where something happened and he just did not believe what I was saying because I was a bit of a prankster. So he thought that I had somehow, as like a prank, decided I'm going to flood this hotel room, but he just could not fathom that I had never looked up from the other side of the room in 2 hours and never seen that water was basically flowing through the room. So,
I think that's it's a really important point that you get at with that story because, as chess teachers, and this is actually something I talk about in the Timmons review that's coming out. As chess teachers, and we tend to sell chess to potential students or potential clients as something that will make them smarter, right? Or something that will have a salutary effect on their academic achievement. Or maybe it'll teach them grit, the way that Paul Tuff talked about it when he talked about IS 318 and Elizabeth Spiegel.
Yeah.
When I talk to parents, I say, well, all of this may be true, but that is not my goal when I'm teaching your son or daughter. My goal is to inculcate a love for the game in them so that 50 years from now, wherever they are, they'll be able to open a chessboard and experience exactly what you experienced. That sense of wonder, that you feel when you see something beautiful in a position. For me, endgame studies are a really good example of this. I am terrible at solving endgame studies. I don't have the mind for it. But there's always that aha moment when you're playing through them that can change everything about your day. That makes, in times when values are sort of up for grabs, I think there's something very valuable about that sort of experience. So that story's dead on for me. That's exactly why I'm involved in chess, and that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, and that's something that Jay Stallings is also really, really good at, is presenting it as sort of a holistic vision of life rather than this, like you say, this little extracurricular activity that gets added to the list of things to put on your college application.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. I did the Kickstarter for Jay Stallings for the books that he's putting out, and I'm really excited to see what they're going to look like when they're done because he's an excellent teacher and for me he's an excellent representative of scholastic chess. So
yes, yeah,
I'll be thrilled to see what they come up with.
Yes, definitely. So a couple more topics, John.
Sure.
Before we go, so chess in Nebraska. You mentioned. You probably don't get to play in tournaments as much as a lot of our guests and listeners. So what's it like if you're trying to improve at chess, but there aren't a lot of chances to actually compete?
It is hard. Nebraska, I live in Omaha, and so we do have...
Sorry, I should say for international listeners, Nebraska is smack dab in the middle of the United States, and it's not known for its population density. So.
No, although curiously it does have a fairly storied chess history. So, I'm working on a couple of long-term projects. One is an article for Chess Life later this year on chess in New Orleans and Morphy. This is the 300th anniversary of the city's founding, so I'm going to go down there and visit the Morphe Room at Brennan's restaurant. That's where his house used to be. It's now a very famous restaurant. Talk to some of the chess players in the town, and also talk to this gentleman, a radiologist of all things, who made a movie about Morphe. So that'll be something that's coming up. But also, I'm working on a project about Howard Oman, who was a reverend here in Omaha back, I don't know, in the 20s. Well, actually, I think roughly starting like 1910 through 1960 or 1970. I can't remember his dates right off the top of my head. But Oman was said by Reuben Fine to be the strongest amateur player in the country in 1932. He won the amateur section at Pasadena in 1932. When Alyekin came through town, he summoned Oman to the train station to play blitz with him. So this is giant of American chess that no one knows about. And when he died, his score sheets were lost. Jack Spence, who John Donaldson, another fantastic interview you had, by the way, Donaldson talks about Spence in the Fisher books. Spence was basically a chess historian, a chess player, but also someone who collected game scores and kept them. And he kept a bunch of Oman scores, and then they were lost. And we didn't know where they were. Spence died in 1978, and the score sheets are lost, and we never hear from them again. And then mysteriously, last year they turned up. Someone had them at their house, and we were able to get copies of them. And then the originals were sent to the Nebraska State Chess Association, to the Nebraska State Historical Society. But in Nebraska, we have maybe 230 rated players, a lot of whom are juniors, a lot of whom are rated under 1,000. So it's hard for someone like me who is trying to play better and better players to get better without traveling. Luckily, Iowa does have quite a few masters. James Neal, Joseph Wan, Robert Keating, Tim McEntee, Dan Bradshaw, who's almost 2,300 now. So there's a lot of good competition. You just have to go to Iowa for it, or sometimes they come to us if we're running big tournaments. But one of the curious things about talking about the internet and talking about the wonders of technology is that with ICC or with Lee Chess or Chess.com, you can get a game any time of day. I think that's how someone like Conrad Holt, who grew up in Kansas, he wouldn't have been able to be a grandmaster despite his innate talent if it wasn't for the internet. And that's sort of a nice mitigating factor for someone like me here in Omaha.
Yeah, it does make a difference. Although there's just no substitute for a tournament game. I don't know.
No,
I don't know what it is.
True. That's very true. And one of the problems here actually is that there aren't a lot of organizers either, or a lot of directors. So I end up directing quite a bit when I should be playing. But
yeah, I think a lot of listeners, even in I live in Pittsburgh, although I'm actually moving soon. But even in Pittsburgh, that's an issue. Like the tournaments at the Pittsburgh Chess Club, people are more eager to play than direct. So
yeah, and I grew up watching Harold Stenzel, who is I think he's an international arbiter. He would play in his own tournaments at the Nassau Chess Club. But when I'm running something like a scholastic event and an adult event, I feel like I can't be rushing to the board and making my moves and then trying to put out the fires with the kids, making illegal moves and asking questions about it.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. Chess is hard enough as it is.
Yeah,
without directing. So you mentioned, John, I don't know if you were. So you mentioned you feel like you're an 1800 with the talent of a 1500. So what makes you say that you are the talent of a 1500?
I just have so many holes in the way I play. I mean, I miss things tactically. That's actually one of the nice things about going through the steps, is that it has helped me fix some of that, although it's certainly not perfect. But paying better attention to my pieces, to when they're unprotected or underprotected. Even simple things like, when one of your pieces can defend another piece through an opponent's piece, like an X-ray defense.
Right.
For some reason, when I saw that in step 2 or step 3, I was like, oh my God, why did I never think of this before? This is genius. And that's the sort of thing that, getting back to the steps, you can learn that very systematically that way. So when I say I'm like a 1500 talent, I just didn't learn chess properly when I was a kid. And, after a certain point, I think there's limits to how much better you can get. I don't want to disagree with your friend, Greg. I saw his recent blog post, but I'm not sure that that there are. I think there are limits to how much better people can get at any age, and for me, I definitely feel like there are limits to how much better I can get at chess. That's one of the reasons I teach. Actually, is I'm trying to make sure that people who are learning don't fall into the same traps I did.
Yeah, I mean, it's just easier. Everything is so systematic now. Even like the stuff on chess.com where they present like, okay, here's a bishop ending where you're up a pawn, play it against a computer,
Which is, for me, I mean, that's actually a great example of a excellent use of technology for training. It's one of the things Esben Lund talks about in that book, Sharp Endgames, which I just reviewed. He says, if you want to learn endings, one of the things you have to do is you have to practice them, right? It's not enough to say Lucina, but you have to be able to do it over the board. So one of the ways you do that is you get an engine and you practice it until you can do it, in a minute or 2 minutes or whatever. That's a very simple example. It's not one that's in his book, but it's the same point, right? Here's a position. You're a pawn up in a bishop ending. Do it.
Yeah, over and over until you beat this 2600 computer.
Yeah, although for me, I think one interesting tweak on that, and it's actually something I'm working on for a piece for US Chess Online as part of that Chess Tech University, which I put on the shelf for a little while because of, lack of confidence, I guess. I think that we're all familiar with Stockfish, we're familiar with Komodo and Houdini, but there are all these engines that are, maybe rated 1800 or 2000. So for me, I'd rather play one of those engines that I know is slightly stronger than me, but will be a more natural 2000, if that makes sense. Because like sometimes if you play Stockfish, it makes all these grandmaster moves, then all of a sudden it's like it had a lobotomy and drops a piece.
Yeah.
And this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
These engines are a little more natural.
Interesting.
So one of the things that I'll be talking about in that article, and hopefully if I can actually write this book, would be, here are some engines that you can use. Like, I can't think of any off the top of my head. One of them is named Hercules. One of them is named, ISA. There's just a whole bunch of them, and they're all, rated from roughly 1500 to 2400. So you can find something that'll match you.
Okay, I didn't know about that, but that's definitely a knock on the lower rated programs that I've noticed. So it's good that someone's out there addressing it.
Yeah, well, it's. I don't think they're doing it consciously. I think it's just that maybe they're older engines that don't have all the programming tweaks and techniques. Some people do write engines consciously and try to delimit their strength, but I think mostly these are just engines that maybe aren't as well written. And again, that's no knock on the authors. It's just we can't all be Larry Kaufman. Right.
So John, you made an allusion earlier to being sort of a part-time chess teacher. So do you have work outside of chess that you're still doing?
Right now, I have a 3-year-old daughter, and my wife is a librarian. So I am at home with my daughter a couple days a week, and then she goes to school a couple days a week, and that's when I do my teaching and my writing. So I have some private students, and I coach the chess club at Brown L. Talbot, which is a private school here in Omaha, and then I also write for Chess Life and some other websites. So US Chess Online and chessbase.com.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, maybe we should probably talk a little more offline about like ways to drum up more business.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. I mean, I had a lot of friends who teach in New York, and I think their workload is a lot bigger than mine. But I'm at 5. I'm at 5 private students right now, and I feel overwhelmed. I mean, I feel like, it's hard for me to make sure I'm giving each of them enough attention and enough time. And, I know some people who are doing 20 or 30, and I can't fathom it. Yeah. It's also, I also understand now why they always told me, if you're a teacher, you don't want to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, you're so busy looking at things like double attacks that when it comes to your own games, all of a sudden you feel like, I don't know how to think anymore.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Okay, John, any topics we should hit before we both get back to our lives?
I'm trying to think. I think we covered a lot. I mean, I just want to say it's a great honor for me to be asked to do this. I look at the people. I mean, I've listened to just about all the pods that you've done, and the people you've had on here, and then somehow I'm here too. It's cognitive dissonance. I just don't really. I feel very unworthy, but I'm very honored that you did ask me, so thank you.
Well, it's nice of you to say, but as I've said before, I feel slightly derelict as a host that every time a book gets recommended, there's a only 20% chance I've read the book. I'm well steeped in the classics from when I was young and improving, as I talked about in the story I told earlier. But I just, I had 15 years where I worked in other fields and I wasn't playing chess very actively. So it makes me feel bad, and it's not that the desire isn't there for me, but at this moment in my life, I'm not able to read all of these amazing recommendations that people have. So I thought that you would be a great person to really just, go deep on all of the possible books, because I'm starting to get feedback from the surveys that I mentioned, and I'm going to close up that survey soon. But, of course, people like us have an insatiable desire to improve at chess. So I would like to serve them. And the best way for me to do that is to have guests who've read more books than I have.
Yeah, is it worth, doing some specific recommendations for specific strengths? Is it worth doing some of that?
If you could rattle them off, sure.
Yeah. So, there are, the great thing about, the publishing world today, we've got all these great publishers, even new ones, like Elkin Ruby, which is a Russian house that is putting out things like, books about endgame studies, or
the Bronstein memoir, right?
Which, a beautiful book, but painful to read. It's not that Sasanko. Sasanko is a great chess writer. He's a great writer, period. But the picture he paints of Bronstein is just so ugly. It's really painful to read, but in an enlightening way, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. We've got all these houses: Quality Chess, Everyman, Gambit. I'm sure, I'm blanking. Thinkers Publishing, which is a new one. They're all putting out such good stuff, so that in a certain sense, I feel like you can't go wrong with almost anything. For openings, I still like Ruben Fine's Ideas Behind the Chess Openings as just a basic book for someone trying to get a sense of openings. Some of the discussion of things like the Benko or the Benoni is very dated, but it gives you a lot of the ideas. John Watson's Mastering the Chess Openings is obviously a great book, a great series, but that's more for advanced players. I also like Pete Tamburo's Chess for Amateurs. I think it's a collection of his columns, basically, and it has a lot of good ideas for class players who are trying to improve their openings or decide on openings. For tactics books, I really like a lot of them. For someone just starting out, I think John Bain's Chess Tactics for Students is great. It's a workbook. The one thing I don't like about it is that it puts some of you make a move and then it gives you the response and then you have to make a move. So it sort of gives you half the answers, but the rest of the book is so good that I think it more than makes up for it. David Regis and Tim Onions. This is kind of a hard book to get, but it's called 10 Ways to Succeed in the Middle Game. They've got a series. There's one called 10 Ways to Succeed in the Opening in Chess, and then there's 10 Ways to Succeed in the Ending. They're all excellent books for beginners. They give a lot of really simple but very clear advice. And for some similar stuff, you can go to the Exeter Chess Club website, which is run by David Regis. It's got more material than you could ever possibly make use of, so it's a really rich resource. I also like Sergei Ivanchenko's Manual of Chess Combinations. So there's 5 volumes. Basically, if you get the first 2, it's probably good up through 1400 or 1600. If you get all the way through volume 5, I think it takes you through 2400, so it's great. For more advanced players, The Steps, of course, is a great way to work on tactics. There's a lot of tactics there. Artur Yusupov's 9 volumes on his 9-volume training series from Quality Chess it covers everything, but I think that's a really great resource too.
For what level?
On the website they say it's like 1500 through 2200, and those first books are not for 1500 players. They're more for 1800 players. Some of them are very, very difficult. And then you get to, for those who don't know the series, there's a series that it's 9 books, 3 roughly that are pitched to 1500, 3 which are pitched to 1800, 3 which are pitched to like 2100. And for me, all of those are a little low. So I would say, the 1700 player could read the first series. I think a 2000 player would do well to read the second series. Should start with the first ones, of course, because there's a lot of good stuff in there, probably even for masters. And then the last series, I think, is probably just for 2200 and above. It's really, really tough stuff. I haven't gotten through all of it nearly, despite my best efforts. There's also good apps. For tactics, Chess Tempo is great, and Chess King, which I think used to be affiliated with Convecta or Chess Assistant. They have CT Art, which of course is like the classic tactics trainer. It's based on Maxim Bloch's combinations books. That's really good stuff. I think Chess Tactics for Beginners too is a great app. For strategy, I like Michael Steen's Simple Chess. It's kind of advanced, but it's a really nice, easy introduction to strategic ideas. Jeremy Silman's Reassess Your Chess, of course, is wonderful, and it's very entertainingly written. So I think that's helpful. I think having a good writer who is funny can be a good thing for getting you to read the book. Herman Grooten, who is a Dutch international master, he's written 2 books that I think are useful for strategy, broadly speaking. Chess Strategy for Club Players and Attacking Chess for Club Players. It's a lot of good examples. I also like it because he's at least familiar with the STEPS program, so some of his terminology is very similar to it. So if you like the STEPS method, you'll really like the Grooten books. And then I also like a book that I think Greg Shahade mentioned, Mastering Chess Strategy by Helstein. I think that's it's just lots and lots of examples that you can pull out and work on open files or isolated pawns or things like that. So it's a really nice book. Endgames, of course, Dvoretsky. Karsten Mueller's books are always good. His DVDs are excellent. I also like Panchenko's Theory and Practice of Chess Endings. I think that's a great 2-volume resource. You can get it for about $30. The binding is a little flimsy, but that's no big deal. You just have to be careful with it. And then books like Bernd Rosen's Chess Endgame Training, I think, are great, or Ian Snape, Chess Endings Made Simple. They're both really, really good books for someone trying to learn basic endings. And, of course, game collections. I mean, any game collection, I think, any classic game collection is worth getting. But in particular, something like Reinfeld's Tarash's Best Games of Chess, Alyekin's My Best Games of Chess, Botvinnik's Smyslov, Petrosian, I think the new edition that came out from Quality Chess, Petrosian's it's not Petrosian's Legacy. It's which is another great book by Petrosian. That's like his lectures. I'm thinking of Python Strategy. It's a wonderful book. Has a lot of his notes, so that's a really great book to read if you're interested in Petrosian. I mean, I could just keep talking and going on and on and on, but that's a good list right there of things to start
I would
with.
say no listener can ever say again that they haven't been recommended enough chess books. So.
And for advanced players, of course, I mean, Agard and all of Agard's books are excellent. I have to say that even though I'm friends with John, Agard's books and of course Dvoretsky's books. They're that's the pinnacle of chess writing for me. So
yeah, they're incredible. Okay. Well, John, I want to thank you. This was great. So I've got extensive notes here. I'll try to include everything. I think I basically got everything down, and I'll run it by you and see if there's anything you want to amend. But
I'll try to throw some of these recommendations also up on my website.
Okay.
Chessbookreviews.wordpress.com.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sure you can just Google like John Hartmann book reviews and find the site. I think I found it that way a couple times.
Yeah,
so.
I'm not too hard to find.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and you're on Twitter as well and Facebook.
Yeah,
so
Hartmann Chess is my Twitter handle, and if you want to get me via email, you can email me at john@hartmannchess, one word, HARTMANNCHESS.com.
Okay. Well, thanks, John. This was great.
Thank you so much, and I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, every guest says that, and none of them did. So
okay.
Don't worry about it.
There's always a first time, right?
I suppose, but it hasn't happened yet.
Perfect.
Thanks to everyone who supports Perpetual Chess. I spend about 5 hours a week on each episode, and even though I love doing the show, it can be hard to find the time. Without the financial support of the chess community, Perpetual Chess would not be possible. Special shout out goes to my Patreon and PayPal Perpetual partners, and I have finally updated the list. You guys are Adam Vrancoulge, Adrian Gutierrez, Alex Pejas, Chad Hilton, Chris Flanagan, Chris Lott, Chris Wainscott, Christopher Wood, Coach Jay's Chess Academy, Gary Andrews, Greg Shahade, James Bonastasia, Jason Dunbar, Jeffrey Martello, Jen Shahade, Jennifer Valens, Jen Scream, John Fernandez, Johnny McMenamin, Kelly Palmer, Krishna Gopalakrishnan, Lorraine Dore, Macaulay Peterson, Matthew Tedesco, Pascal Charbonneau, Paul Swaney, Peter Lux, Peter Merrifield, Ricky Grijalva, Rob Lazorchek, Tatya Abrahamian, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Todd Bryant, Tony Rotella, Victor Vrankulj, Zhao Cheng, Zhivko Storyanov. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll catch you guys next week with another episode.